Hey, I'm Brad, and I'm back for my first video of 2019, which is going to be an Overkill Rewind. You know, the show where you vote for them, we tally them up, and then we review the top 5 albums from any given year. And this time, we're going back to 2001. If you like videos like this, we're here every week, so please hit subscribe, hit that bell, and don't miss out. So in 2001, I was 11, so if you care about what I was up to at that point, you're either my parents or you're fucking weird. So I'm gonna give you some metal updates about what happened that year. Unfortunately, Chuck Schuldiner of Death passed away. Rest in peace. Also, Jason Newsted left Metallica and Wes Borland left Limp Bizkit and formed the best supergroup. They didn't form a supergroup, but I kind of wish they did, just for morbid curiosity purposes. And some new bands that would go on to big things formed, such as the Black Dahlia Murder, Municipal Waste, Misery Index, Avatar, and the Acacia Strain. On to the top 5 albums of 2001 as chosen by you. First up, we've got System of a Down and their album Toxicity, which came out on American/Columbia Records on September 4th, 2001. System of a Down formed in 1994 in California. They released their self-titled debut in 1998, and this came 3 years later in, yes, 2001. This album was a huge success, going to #1 on the Billboard 200 on the backs of 3 singles, Toxicity, Aerials, and Chop Suey. Me personally, whatever I've heard of the band in the past was a little bit too operatic, too sporadic, too weird for my taste. So I was kind of hoping that you guys would not vote this in and I wouldn't have to talk about it. But I knew that it would because they're a huge band. So without further ado, I'm gonna talk about System of a Down. This album is quirky. Their base here is alternative metal, but they have tons of extraneous influences coming in and flavoring their sound. They jump all over the place, but they kind of rein it back in and pull it back to somewhere that makes sense at exactly the right time for the majority of this album. For example, we've got the first track, Prison Song, which has this bizarre skronky riff and these rapped vocals, which then goes into this bass-led pre-chorus, and the vocals are now like some moany thing going on. And then it gives way to a chorus that's pretty chugging, proper heavy, you know, a little bit more of a traditional metal thing. So again, they pulled it back in. And there's also some transition vocals here where dude is screaming and it proper just sounds like air through a friggin' wind tunnel. They also do a very good job of walking the line between their bizarre side and a radio-friendly side, which they did on those 3 singles, which you're probably familiar with. So I'm not gonna talk about those anymore. I'm gonna move on to when they go too weird, such as the bizarre ode to orgies called Bounce, which just seems weird for the sake of weird and doesn't really add anything, but generally the eccentricness adds to their sound. I just think it's really cool that an album this weird and this politically progressive made as much of a mainstream impression as it did on some tracks, not the orgy track. So I actually ended up being fairly impressed with this album when I actually took the time to sit down and listen to it. The out there influences are also actually pulled in quite cohesively, and overall I was impressed by the album. They also get quite heavy at parts too. So because of all that, I'm giving it 4 out of 5 skulls. I still don't know why they got so popular though. That's weird. Coming in at #4 is another album that came out on September 4th. This one being Converge's Jane Doe, which initially came out on Equal Vision Records and has since been re-released on vocalist Jacob Bannon's own label, Deathwish Inc. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, you already know I love this band. If you're not, watch my review of their latest. You'll see I have my whole back tattooed in honor of this band. They formed in 1990, which was the same year that I was born. They released a few albums ahead of this one, but they've been quite vocal about the fact that they don't like those albums, and this is kind of the start of a new era in their sound. If you want more history about the band, I did a complete career-spanning timeline for Exclaim. You can read it online. I'll put the link in the description, but this is what it is. See, I called this album Essential on it, so I'm going to talk about this album, but it wasn't always viewed as essential. For the first interview I ever did for Exclaim, vocalist Jacob Bannon actually told me that the press response to this album was hugely negative. If I remember correctly, I think he told me it was like 90% negative, but they picked up like the #1 album for Terrorizer that year. I think that they got a similar accolade from Exclaim. This album is noisy, yet strangely melodic. The opening 1-2 punch of Concubine and Fault and Fracture, which actually got put together as a video, is caustic and cathartic, just blaring ahead with Jacob just shrieking over them. The next couple songs, Distance and Meaning and Hell to Pay, hinted at noise rock influences that the band would expand upon throughout the rest of their career. Homewrecker has the best drum fills ever. They just get in there and get out of there, never overstay their welcome. They're the perfect amount of like technicality without being showboating. They're just perfect. And the song itself is perfect metallic hardcore. And then you get the epic closer, the title track, and I don't use the word epic lightly here. This song is exactly that. This whole album has these deeply poetic lyrics about the dissolution of a relationship. Obviously, throughout this, you've probably gathered, I love this album. I loved it when I first heard it. I still love it now. It's an absolute landmark in metallic hardcore. It was so important that the face on the album cover kind of became a de facto symbol for the band. No surprise, I'm giving this album 5 out of 5 skulls, and you should definitely check it out. Third on our best metal albums of 2001, as chosen by you, is Slipknot and their sophomore release, Iowa, which came out on August 28th via Roadrunner Records. Slipknot formed in 1995 in Iowa, and they donned masks and prison suits and took over the world. This is their second album, and when it came out, they were riding high off the success of their self-titled debut, which actually ended up being Roadrunner's first ever platinum selling record. I'm sure a lot of people saw Slipknot masks and was like, wow, that's cool. Me, I didn't like it. I thought it felt like a gimmick, and it turned me off from the band for a long time. When I finally did get around to listening to this band, and specifically the album Iowa, I was blown away. Corey Taylor actually told me in an interview for Aggressive Tendencies that he doesn't consider Slipknot to be a new metal band. He considers them more of a bridge between that sound and the new wave of American heavy metal that would follow, which I believe is a pretty enlightened and self-aware statement. Though this album has some of the simple groove-based riffs that new metal became known for, Slipknot just beat the listener over the head with stuff that their contemporaries were not doing. So opener, People Equal Shit, opens with just this blast beat, and there are blast beats also all over a follow-up track, Disaster Piece, which also has just an unrelenting use of the double bass. And there are also trem-picked riffs all over the place on this album. I mean, quite frankly, I've heard it before and I'll say it here. Death metal never got closer to the pop or radio charts as it did on this album. The second half of the album focuses on mood over mosh, with creepy soundscapes only added to by the fact that the band have a dedicated sampler and percussionist. That being said, though the heavy parts of a song like Skin Ticket hit that much harder because of that brief reprieve, those moodier parts really overstay their welcome in the bloated 15-minute title track. But what we all really remember about this album are the choruses, such as the one in People Equal Shit or Heretic Anthem, you know, the if you're 555, I'm 666, which are perfect and edgy. And then you've even got the chorus on My Plague, which is like arena radio friendly, a direction that the band would continue to go on. As I said, I kind of swore off this band when I first saw them wearing the masks and whatnot, and I'm glad that I eventually got over that and listened to them because I loved this album when I first heard it. I still love it to this day. That being said, I don't always make it to the second half of the album. The first half is straight bangers though. It's a solid album, and for that reason I'm giving it 4 out of 5 skulls. At number 2, we've got Tool and their album Lateralus, which came out on Volcano Entertainment on May 15th. The band is from LA, and this was their third album and came out after a 5-year wait after their sophomore release, which at the time probably felt like a long time, but then they waited 5 years to release the next album, and now they're pushing 13 years for the follow-up to their 4th album. So hindsight's 2020 and life's a bitch. So why would I not want to review an album that's more or less praised across the board by music nerds? Well, I already had a vision of what the band were like based on their fans from when I was in school. They were the kind of kids who would skip class to stand out at the smoke pit wearing their Tool hoodie, making it smell like cigarettes while talking about the man. So I had an inkling of what the band was like, and I just kind of avoided them. But you guys twisted my arm, and I had to listen to them, and now I've got some thoughts on Tool. Okay, first of all, the opening riff to this album constantly made me feel like they were gonna break into that Disturbed, ooh, I can't do that thing. Edit that on top, please. I'm not calling them like a new metal band or anything. I recognize the playing is on like an insane level. Maybe The playing's too good. It's too perfect, and I don't like perfect. There are parts I like on this album. Like, don't take this as I listened to this once and then gave up on it. I listened a bunch, and I found parts I liked. Often, the end of the song. And I don't mean that in some cynical, like, hey, what's the best part? The best part is the end because I don't have to listen to it. I mean that in that there are little bursts of creativity at the end of the song, such as on The Schism and Ticks and Leeches. Actually, that song is just my favorite on the album, probably because it's the heaviest. Those cool endings I talked about earlier, and pretty much the majority of my favorite parts on this album, are all led by drummer Danny Carey, who is by far the shining star of this album. That being said, Parabola has some cool guitar riffs, and Reflection has these weird backmass vocals from Maynard that add to the haunting vibe. So, despite the fact that there are parts that I do like about this band, I still think there's very much a culture around them of, you just don't get it. Case in point, when I was looking up lyrics for this album, I got led to the Genius page for the title track, which told me that it is about over-analysis leading to loss of control. But then the band made the song something that's tailor-made for over-analysis, what with all these musical cues and references to the Fibonacci sequence. Maybe there's some kind of irony to this, that it's a joke that I'm just not into. Maybe some people like peeling back the layers of an onion on their music and trying to figure out the meaning. But for me, I don't like peeling onions. It just makes me cry. I've reviewed some stuff that is objectively bad. Looking at you, Suicide Silence. But I'm not naive enough to think that this is that. I just think that the band needs to get to the point quicker. There's a lot of meandering that I wish wasn't there. Sorry, super fans. I'm giving this 2.5 skulls out of 5. All right, coming in at number 1 on our best metal albums of 2001, once again, as chosen by you, is Opeth and their album Blackwater Park, which came out on Music for Nations / Koch Records on March 12th. Opeth formed in 1990 in Sweden, and before this, their 5th album released 4 albums of increasingly progressive and cohesive death metal fusion. This album was produced by Steven Wilson of the band The Porcupine Tree and was the jumping off point for this band to really launch their musical career. The critical reception was near unanimous praise. I personally didn't listen to the album when it came out. You may recall, if you've watched my Overkill Rewind 2008, that I hadn't really dug into this band until I had to for that point. Not because I didn't like them. I liked what I'd heard. Their discography was massive. So I finally dug in then, and I had feelings then about Blackwater Park, so I'm glad that I get to tell you about them now. Opener, The Leper Affinity, kicks off this album with some discordant strumming and leads to the most overtly metal song on the album. That being said, this isn't an album of sick riffs, bro, even though the fact that there are lots of sick riffs. The focus isn't a sick riff with like some trem picking and blast beats. It's more about an overall product and flow and cohesion. But I'm gonna highlight what might be my favorite riff for just a second here. On the title track, there's this start and stop riff that snakes in and out of this 12-minute monolith of a song. A mid-track breakdown is almost as compelling as the melodic solo that comes after it. Perhaps most impressive is the fact that they can just stop on a dime and switch from something super aggressive to something super mellow, or vice versa. For example, the growl section of Bleak leads to a labyrinthine snake of a segue that results in what might be the catchiest singing on the album. Most of the album is progressive, but the rock is more of a sway, where on The Funeral Portrait, there's a full-on prog rock riff. When I first dove into Opeth for my Overkill Rewind 2008, this was the album that kept coming up as their finest hour. And I can see why. It was also the first one to really resonate with me. It's the shining star in their discography, which is full of gems. That being said, this is the 5 out of 5 Opeth album. All right, so that's it, the top 5. Thank you everyone for your picks. Made some great choices there for me to dissect. So when I look at those 5 albums, there are some themes that run throughout. First of all, they all feel like albums. It's not the kind of thing where you're gonna cherry pick a single, you're gonna listen front to back. Second, a lot of bands released like their defining album in 2001, like pretty much all of these bands. Before we go, I've got some honorable mentions from the poll. In descending order, we've got Slayer, their album God Hates Us All, Creators, Violent Revolution, Sodom's M16, Pig Destroyers, Prowler in the Yard, and Rammstein's Mutter, which makes 3 German albums in our runners-up section, which is kind of interesting. And some of my personal picks that I wish I could have talked about, got Every Time I Die's Last Night in Town, Seven Angels, Seven Plagues, Jasmine's Lullaby, Anal Nathrax, The Codex Necro, Aborted's Engineering the Dead, and From Autumn to Ashes, Too Bad You're Beautiful. But who knows, maybe you guys will vote in those bands for another year because we're going to keep doing Overkill Rewinds. So don't forget to subscribe so that you can vote moving forward for the albums that we cover. I'll see you next time.